Let's go through these stories in a bit more detail. Nathaniel Ogunniyi, a political commentator, is here with me. Nathaniel, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. How's it going?
Very well. One of the other stories on the front page of the Telegraph is up to 1 million people have been wrongly categorised as too sick to work when they were willing unable to get a job. We've talked so much recently about why there's so many of us off work long-term sick. What's going on here?
So this is a report from the Centre for Social Justice. It's a think tank run by former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith. But they're talking about about 1 million people who are what they call hidden unemployed. So they're people who want to and can work but aren't actively looking for a job at the moment. And I think this is part of a broader post-pandemic trend in the labour market where you have higher levels of inactivity. You have lots of people who retired early during the pandemic, but actually you have lots of younger people who are signed off as long-term sick. I think the latest figure from the ONS is 2.5 million. About 2.5 million people signed off for long-term sick. And I think that makes it difficult for you. That makes it difficult for you to grow the economy. It makes it difficult for you to get the workers that you need. It's sort of difficult to fire an economy if you don't have all the cylinders.
Yeah, of course. That's one challenge the Chancellor will want to overcome today.
Yes. So that is certainly part of Reeve's plans to grow the economy. It's also a big part of the work being done in the Department for Work and Pensions. So they've promised to get a Get Britain Working paper out later this year, and that's about how you can support people into work, people who are coming off long-term sickness or people who've been long-term unemployed. But it's about giving people a broader sense of employment support rather than just the carrot and stick method that the job centres used to offering.
The other thing they're going to be doing, looking at the front page of The Guardian, is investigate those COVID contracts. And the previous government recommend dropping any attempt to investigate them. I mean, maybe they don't want to know what would be found. Of course, that was £600 million worth. These sort of very lucrative contracts awarded through VIP lanes often. What do you think the Labour Party are looking to find here?
So I think there's a political context to this, which is even if the COVID fraud commissioner does not find a single pound of government spending went wrong, which I think is probably unlikely, but even if the COVID fraud commissioner doesn't find a single pound that's gone wrong, actually there's a political point, which is this Labour government are different from the last Conservative government, right? And they will be trying to shift as much blame as possible onto that last Conservative government. We see this in other areas. We saw this with the Budget Responsibility Bill that Labour passed. That's a higher political thing. That is essentially trying to say, hey, look, we're the new guys, we're Labour, we're different from that last government. And so it's sort of a dividing line, I think, between the current and the last government.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be. Carry on.
One thing to say on the public appointment, on the COVID fraud commission, I think, is that there's a guidance on public appointments, right? That comes from the Cabinet Office. The Cabinet Office effectively tell you if you want to appoint someone high profile to government, this is how to do it. And it seems like some of that guidance hasn't been followed. So the first thing about that is it does ask you if you're appointing someone at a senior level to include someone not from the department on the appointments panel. But Labour in this case haven't chosen to do that. So I think there'll be questions about that. And there also doesn't seem like there'll be any pre-appointment scrutiny. So oftentimes, whether they're for senior individuals at the Bank of England or for senior civil servants, you know, even the groceries code adjudicator, they go through Parliament to make sure that appointment is proper and sound. And I'm not sure that Labour have put forward any plans to do that yet.
And that comes back to the next story I want to talk about, which is that of Sue Gray and the infighting, reports of infighting behind the scenes. And Labour critics, says the Deputy Prime Minister, are seeking to demonise Sue Gray. Angela Rayner has said sort of that she's facing unfair scrutiny because she's a woman. Is it about that? Is it about her gender? Or is it about her salary? Maybe some of the rows that have been going on that we don't see, but we certainly hear about.
So I think the difficulty with Sue Gray is not just the salary. The salary would have found out anyway because the government are obliged to declare special advisor salaries. So the fact that we found out her salary a bit earlier than the government were planning to publish it anyway is not necessarily a big deal. But I think the fact it was leaked speaks to a degree of dysfunction. The fact it was leaked tells us that there is quite serious infighting within Downing Street. I think on one side you have Morgan McSweeney and a few other special advisors, and here we clearly have Angela Rayner and Sue Gray shaping up on the other side. I think Angela Rayner and Sue Gray have both been under significant pressure in recent days. Obviously, you were just talking about Angela Rayner and the difficulties she's had around declaring her holiday. I think on Friday, the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and the Chancellor all agreed that they won't be accepting any more gifts of clothing. But both Angela Rayner and Sue Gray have come under sustained pressure, both for different reasons, right? Sue Gray has cut a lot of special advisors' pay, and that's made a good number of them unhappy. In fact, not all of them are earning the same as they were outside of government, right? It's sort of difficult to go from working for an opposition party, talking about things but not actually doing anything, to going to a government department, actually having responsibility for millions of pounds in spending, and then being paid less than you were in opposition. So I think that's what has caused a lot of the rancour amongst the special advisor ranks.
Yeah, the upset. And you wonder if these are sort of teething problems. But the sort of flip side to that is that they have had, as they keep telling us, 14 years to prepare for this moment. And now they've got it, crucially. And they'll want to try and do this and change the narrative a little bit later today. Talk to us about the plans they're going to have rather than the rows that they're having. We're going to speak to a Labour advisor in about 10 minutes or so. Let's look to some international news now, Nathaniel, and looking inside the world section of the Times. And there's obviously quite a big question mark for President Zelensky about what happens in terms of the support he receives from the US, dependent on who wins the White House. He's going to call for security guarantees to prevent Ukraine being forced into what he's concerned could be a very unfavourable peace deal by a future Trump administration. What are his concerns? Do you think they'll be listened to?
Yes, so Zelensky's looking for security guarantees in case of a Trump victory. I suppose the first part of that is to look at how likely a Trump victory is. And I think given his performance in the recent debates, given the way that Kamala has been raising a lot of money across the states recently, it appears that she is the more likely of the two. Although, of course, plenty of people said that back in 2016, and Donald Trump ended up winning there. I suppose the angle for Ukraine here is that there is a fear that a Donald Trump victory would lead to a rolling back of US support. And of course, Ukraine couldn't last very long in this war without that. I think there's a broader context of UK support. The UK's obviously done a lot in terms of supporting Ukraine. I think in January of this year, we were the first country to sign a bilateral security deal with Ukraine. That was obviously under a Conservative government then. But I think one of the areas that Labour and the Conservatives have had a lot of unity is Ukraine. Both main parties have expressed their support for Ukraine in winning this war.
Yeah, well, Zelensky's travelling to the United Nations General Assembly in New York this week, then to Washington. He's going to present a victory plan, and the idea is to press Russia to negotiate, and said, look, the plan needs swift backing from Western leaders so Ukraine could begin talks before the end of the year from what he wants to be a position of strength. It is going to be really interesting to see how those conversations take part, and if he can get a sort of, what Zelensky wants is a Trump-proof peace plan. Is that possible? More on that a little bit later on Times Radio Breakfast. Some other slightly lighter stories. I wonder, you're talking to me right now with headphones on. I'm wearing them. They're the over-the-head ones. But lots of us have been using those sort of inner-ear headphones. Looking inside the Telegraph, I think this is probably no surprise, but some of your earphones you could be using could be damaging your hearing.
Yes, so there is regulation on sort of how loud these things can be, but actually when you put earbuds in, sometimes if you play music at them loudly, consistently, the device that you're using, so whether that's a laptop or a phone, will usually tell you you've been listening to loud music for a while.
And I mean, would you take sort of notice of this? How much would you be thinking about your health when you choose which headphones to wear?
Well, I suppose it's not an immediate concern for most people, but it is a long-term thing, right? You don't want to be wearing headphones that over the course of time send you deaf.
It's one of those obvious things that wearing them right inside your ear is probably not a very good idea, but we're all doing it. The paper says how in-ear headphones could damage your hearing, which sort of seems slightly obvious. There is a few papers covering this story, this town. Let me just find it in The Guardian here this morning. I watched that series on Netflix about the poison pen letters that Olivia Colman featured in. It was a film, I think, actually, but a similar story seems to be developing. This is in the East Yorkshire village of Shiptonthorpe, where for 2 years there has been a campaign of anonymous poison pen letters that have, some people have decided to move away. The letters have got some of the most horrible, insulting threats, wishing cancer on some person, calling someone a cow. What on earth is going on here, Nathaniel?
Yes, it's a quite disturbing story, to be honest. So it's been going on for about 2 years. I think it's Shiptonthorpe in East Yorkshire, which I must confess, before today, I'm not sure I'd heard of. But yeah, it's Shiptonthorpe in East Yorkshire, where for about 2 years, these letters have been going around. The police have been unable to find the culprit, despite looking into CCTV and other means of evidence. But things like that are deeply unpleasant. It's a village of about 500 people, so there aren't masses of people there. And I think oftentimes people move to smaller villages to live a different lifestyle, right? You kind of want things to be a bit more quiet, a bit more peaceful, and this flies directly in the face of that.
Yeah. So this woman received 4 letters in total, reported them to police. They're carrying out sort of inquiries, including reviewing CCTV, but they can't work out who the perpetrator is. It must be absolutely horrible for things like that to drop through your letterbox. Fascinating, though, to work out how and why someone would be doing that. Final thing I wanted to ask you about is fly tipping. And you can sort of get into trouble if, I've done this occasionally, you kind of do a big clear out in your house and then you leave things out on the pavement in case someone wants to take them, maybe like an old chest of drawers or a lamp or whatever. Some people have got into trouble and then been told they're fly tipping when they're doing that. I mean, sort of they are, aren't they?
I mean, I think it's ridiculous to go around fining people when they leave stuff in front of their home for others to collect. I think that's quite ridiculous. On some level, I suppose there's a point about you don't want to be forcing people in wheelchairs or people with children in buggies onto the road because you've blocked the pavement with, the sofa that you got rid of last week or, a chest of drawers, things like that. So there is a serious point about accessibility and making sure that the path is free, particularly for more vulnerable road users who will need it rather than sending them into the road where there's, of course, normal traffic. But more broadly, I think if people are trying to leave stuff out for others to take for free, then I think that's a good thing, right? We talk a lot about recycling. We talk a lot about avoiding waste. And I think a key part of that is actually, this desk may not be useful to me anymore, but it may be useful to someone else.
Yeah, and councils have been told to go easy on fly tippers who leave old furniture outside their house. This was on Tuesday last week. This is Isabel Pepin in Bournemouth. She was shocked, really shocked, she said. She received a £500 fine for leaving an IKEA cabinet outside her home. I mean, something's really gone wrong there, hasn't it? Anyway, councils have been told, maybe just use some common sense. Nathaniel, thank you so much for going through the papers with me this morning. It's been a pleasure.